It was 2:16 p.m. when Martha Lane stepped out onto the firing line at Falcon Ridge Range. The sun was sharp that day, angling down over the high desert like it had something to prove. Heat shimmered across the sandbags, and the metal silhouette targets lined up in the distance. The air smelled of dust, gun oil, and baked earth. Soldiers clustered in loose knots behind the firing line, most of them lounging with rifles slung across their backs or propped up beside them, passing around energy drinks and jokes like it was just another slow afternoon. And then there was Martha. She wore a pair of old Army-issue coveralls streaked with engine grease and burn marks. The knees were frayed, the elbows dark from years of leaning into machinery. Her boots were scuffed, and her name patch had faded into the fabric. She moved slowly, not out of uncertainty, but like someone used to working around things heavier than herself. She carried an M4 carbine in both hands. It looked worse than she did. The handguard had duct tape wrapped around it. The buttstock had been replaced with a mismatched one, and the sling was an improvised strap from what looked like an old duffel bag. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, didn't speak. She just walked to lane 9 and waited. The silence didn't last long. A couple of young privates noticed her first. One nudged the other, laughing through his nose. Someone, a few spots down, pulled out a phone and hit record. They didn't bother hiding it. From behind the barrier, you could hear the smirking commentary. Is she lost? What is this? Bring your grandma to the range day. One of the corporals said she looked like she'd pulled the rifle out of a junkyard and wandered in from the motor pool. The laughter built. Not loud, but contagious. It didn't take much. Martha stood there while the whispers moved behind her, while someone zoomed in on her hands, catching the slight tremor that never quite went away. She adjusted the sling and checked the chamber without looking up. The way her fingers moved, mechanical, practiced, didn't match the rest of her. Not in a flashy way, just a little too confident for someone they thought was a joke. Still, the snickering went on. One of the sergeants, watching from the sideline, raised a brow and muttered under his breath, "Must be some kind of eval or joke from upstairs. That or she's about to teach us what not to do." Martha didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She placed a single mag in her cargo pocket, another in the rifle. She stepped into position with slow, deliberate movement and stared downrange. Somebody said the words out loud, half laughing. "Hope she knows which end the bullet comes out of." And still, Martha said nothing. By 2:20 p.m., every phone behind her was still recording, most of them waiting for her to miss, some already filming the failure they thought was coming. But she just stood there, calm, steady. Her finger rested off the trigger, her cheek close to the worn stock. The line master hadn't even called ready yet, but Martha was already there. Most folks at Falcon Ridge knew her as the woman who kept the HVAC systems running and the generators from overheating. She was the one who fixed jammed doors, patched busted plumbing, and cleared out rattlesnakes from under the mess hall when no one else would touch them. Martha Lane was always around but easy to miss. Quiet, steady, grease under her nails, a ball cap pulled low. Nobody asked much about her past. Nobody thought to. What they didn't know, and what none of them would find in her personnel file, was that she'd once been part of something the Army didn't officially admit existed. The Ghost Hawks, a Black Ops sniper unit trained for forward recon and asymmetric elimination missions, places where cameras didn't go and medals weren't handed out. No name patches, no photographs, just coordinates and silence. Her deployment in Syria started in early 2014. 6 men in her unit. 5 came home. During a covert overwatch in Deir ez-Zor, she'd taken a shot, meant for her spotter. Shrapnel tore through the soft tissue in her wrist and up into her forearm. She finished the mission, then vanished from active duty within the year. Doctors told her the nerve damage was permanent. The tremor in her right hand would never go away. They offered discharge, paperwork, compensation. She didn't take any of it. Instead, she asked to be reassigned. Somewhere off-grid. Somewhere quiet. And when they offered Falcon Ridge, she didn't blink. She learned to work with the tremor the way she had learned everything else, by repetition. By listening to her body, by never letting it control her. She adjusted her grip, adjusted the weight distribution, customized her tools, and she wore a wrist brace under her sleeve. Not the kind you'd buy at a drugstore, but one retrofitted with old Ghost Hawk design specs. Lightweight, carbon frame, reinforced joints. If anyone noticed the odd lines beneath her coveralls, they didn't ask. The only real clue she ever carried was the faded tattoo just above her elbow. The outline of a hawk's wing, inked in black and gray, mostly hidden under her sleeve. But on hot days, when she rolled it up, you could see the curve of the wing just above the grease. Most soldiers passed her in the hallway without a second glance. But every so often, a retired sergeant major or a visiting Green Beret would stop for half a second and look again. Not because they recognized her face, but because they recognized the way she scanned a room without seeming to, the way she kept her back to the wall, the way her body stayed still, like a rifle resting just behind the breath. No one at the range that day knew any of that. To them, she was just the maintenance lady with the duct-taped rifle and the shaky hand. But for those who'd seen combat, real combat, there was a rhythm in her stillness, a precision in the way she checked her surroundings, a weight to her silence. And if they'd looked a little closer, they might have noticed how her eyes never left the tree line, not even once. By 2:22 p.m., the camera phones were out in full force. Half the squad from Bravo Company had clustered behind the safety line, leaning against barriers, sipping from Nalgene bottles like it was a show. And to them, it was. Sergeant Brent Halley stood in the middle of them, arms crossed over his chest, smirking like he owned the range. Mid-30s, confident, always just a little too loud. His phone was already streaming live. Followers piling into the comment section with laughing emojis and gifs of cartoons tripping over rifles. He called out loud enough for everyone to hear, aiming the words straight at Martha without ever saying her name. Said it was refreshing to see the base investing in veteran employment outreach. Said maybe the firing line was a new rehab program for retired supply clerks. The squad roared. Someone behind him added that they should make sure she wasn't aiming at the bleachers. Another joked about needing to update the range's life insurance policy. Martha didn't blink. She was seated on the edge of a bench, methodically checking the bolt on her battered rifle. The tremor in her hand was visible now, subtle but constant. Her fingers moved carefully, tightening a loose sling mount, brushing away sand from the ejection port. She worked in silence, unhurried, not tense, not ashamed, but the laughter kept building, the kind that feeds off itself, the kind that only grows when no one steps in to stop it. A young private leaned into the camera and whispered like it was a nature documentary. Watch closely. Folks, the endangered janitor prepares to miss 5 straight shots. Another wave of laughter. And still, Martha stayed on task, calm, focused, every action deliberate. She hadn't said a word since stepping onto the line. At 2:27 p.m., Sergeant Halley stepped forward, the kind of swagger in his walk that always came before a punchline. The mockery had died down into chuckles now, waiting for the next spark. And Halley, always hungry for attention, gave them one. He called out the challenge with a grin. 5 shots, 300 meters, no excuses. If she missed even one, she'd have to admit the wing tattoo was fake and apologize for pretending to be someone she wasn't. He added a wink that made his squad laugh harder than the joke deserved. Martha didn't look up. She finished sliding the bolt closed on her rifle, stood, and dusted her palms off on her coveralls. Then she turned just enough to speak. Her voice, quiet but level. said she'd take the bet. But if she made all 5, he'd clean every toilet on base for a month. Full scrub. Every stall. No gloves. That got a few real laughs. Not cruel ones this time. Just surprised. Hallie blinked, then gave an exaggerated bow like he was humoring her. The crowd around them shifted, sensing something new. Not kite respect. Not yet, but less certain than before. Martha stepped into the firing lane. She moved without rush, shouldered the rifle like it weighed nothing. 1 mag, 5 rounds. Her fingers steadied the charging handle with the same calm touch she'd used earlier with the wrench in the motor pool. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Here we go." The wind at the range had stilled. Even the usual chatter over comms seemed to pause. Martha closed her left eye, aligned the iron sights, drew in a slow breath. At 2:29 p.m., she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. At 2:17 p.m., the siren cut through the sky like a blade. One long, rising wail, followed by the clipped static of the loudspeaker. A voice barked over it. "Active shooter, outside the perimeter. This is not a drill." Repeat. "This is not a drill." Everything broke at once. Soldiers dove behind barriers. Rifles hit the ground. A rack of ear protection tipped over, scattering foam plugs across the concrete. Someone screamed. Radios flared up with panic bursts. Calls for lockdown. Queries about sectors. Stray bits of code and static. One private froze mid-step, staring down range like the field had swallowed him whole. Then came the shot. The bullet struck just short of the bleachers, sending concrete dust and metal shards ricocheting into the air. A second shot followed. Closer. Someone shouted to get low. A corporal yanked another soldier down by the back of his collar. In the middle of it all, Martha Lane didn't move. She stood near lane 9, her old M4 still slung across her chest. She raised her head and turned slowly toward the northwest corner of the range. The sun was angling west now, casting long shadows across the dirt. She squinted, not flinching, when another round cracked overhead. She knelt just enough to place her left hand flat on the gravel. Then she rose again, calm as a clock winding down. Her voice barely rose above a murmur. 1,200 meters. Elevated. Ridgeline. Scope zeroed for wind drag. No one had even pinpointed direction yet. The tower hadn't called in coordinates. The fire control net was a mess of voices talking over each other. But Martha had already found him. Just by sound, by rhythm, by feel. And she was the only one still standing. The range was still. No commands. No chatter. Just the fading echo of the last shot drifting into the hills. The 50 calories barrel steamed slightly in the heat. The recoil mark still fresh in the dirt behind it. Dust hung in the air, suspended, like time had decided to hold its breath. Martha Lane stood from the prone position without a word. Her movements were slow, intentional. She didn't look around to see who was watching. She didn't need to. They all were. She cradled the Barrett carefully and walked it back to the rack, resting it there with a mechanic's care, like it was just another piece of gear in need of cleaning. Then she stepped back, her hands lowered to her sides. At 2:24 p.m., the black SUV rolled up from the command road, tires crunching softly against gravel. Colonel James Whitaker stepped out before the wheels stopped turning. Tall, square-jawed, with a stare sharp enough to cut steel. He didn't speak at first, just walked through the stunned crowd of soldiers, past the barriers, through the silence. He stopped in front of Martha. His eyes swept her face, then dropped to the grease-stained coveralls, the worn boots, the trembling hands. Then he looked at the bullet-riddled ridge, the sniper no longer a threat. His voice was low, firm, asked her to identify herself. Martha looked up at him. Calm as ever. She said she was maintenance. The colonel stood still, se compassed. Then, without another word, he removed his cover, held it in his left hand, and gave her a salute. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't polite. It was precise, formal, earned. The range didn't breathe. Then, slowly, like leaves caught in the wind, the soldiers began to rise from behind the barriers. One by one, they came to their feet, shoulders back, eyes forward, and followed his lead. Even the ones who'd laughed. Even Hallie, now frozen behind the edge of a concrete wall. His jaw locked tight, face bale, hands stuffed into his vest to keep them from shaking. He didn't speak. He didn't move, but he stood. Martha looked at the colonel. Then she lifted her trembling hand, brought it to her brow with a quiet grace that held the whole range still. The salute wasn't flawless, but it was steady, and it was returned. Martha Lane lowered her hand after returning the salute. The crowd remained frozen for a heartbeat, unsure what to do next. She didn't wait for applause or recognition. She didn't straighten her coveralls or look for commendation. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and said she was just maintenance. That was all anyone needed to know. The soldiers around her shifted in their positions, eyes wide. Some averted their gaze, ashamed for having doubted her. Others just stared, a quiet awe replacing the laughter and bravado that had dominated the morning. Even Sergeant Hallie remained silent, shoulders stiff, hands clenched at his sides. His earlier mockery evaporated into self-conscious humility. Martha began walking away from the firing line, each step deliberate. Her boots scuffed the gravel, her posture steady. The tremor in her hands was still there, subtle and constant, but it no longer mattered. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The range, the soldiers, the chaos of the last hour, it all belonged behind her now. By 2:31 p.m., she had reached the maintenance building. She paused briefly at the door, taking a slow breath, feeling the quiet after the storm settle around her. Inside, she knew no one would ask her to retell what had happened. No one would look for medals. In that silence, she thought to herself, real warriors don't need to be seen. They endure. They wait. And when it matters, they act. And with that, she stepped through the door, leaving the line, the range, and the astonished soldiers behind her. Over the following weeks, the story of Martha Lane, the maintenance worker who had faced down a sniper with calm precision, traveled quietly through Falcon Ridge. It wasn't in any official report, not in the morning briefs or the chain of command emails. It was in the low voices around mess hall tables, in the whispers shared during late-night patrols when only the moon and the hum of generators listened. Some called her Grandma Hawkeye, a nod to the accuracy of her aim and the years she carried herself with quiet strength. Others spoke of her simply as the one who stopped a sniper with a single shot. The details fading, but the impact never. New recruits passing the firing line would hear fragments of her story before they even saw her. Names weren't important. Titles weren't needed. The lesson was in her patience, her discipline, and the way she had let skill and calm speak louder than words. Soldiers who had been there that day began telling the tale to anyone who would listen, careful to preserve the awe without adding exaggeration. They told it as it was, truths softened into legend, but always rooted in the quiet courage of a single, overlooked individual. Months later, a small, unmarked metal plaque appeared on the north wall of the shooting range. Its surface held no name, no dates, only the subtle outline of a hawk's wings, folded inward, etched as if in flight, yet at rest. Every new recruit walked past it. Some paused, tracing the lines with a finger hovering in midair. Others lowered their heads, an unspoken respect settling in the pit of their stomachs. One morning, a young private lingered longer than most, eyes fixed on the plaque. She turned to an older soldier standing nearby and asked what it meant. He looked down at her quietly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, and said simply, "You'll find out." And in that moment, the weight of Martha Lane's legacy was clear, not in medals or citations, but in reverence, in tradition, in the silent understanding that true warriors endure, observe, and act when it matters most. Her story had become part of the ground beneath their boots, a lesson passed without fanfare, quietly shaping the soldiers who would walk the line long after she had stepped away.